Jenny Turner, Lovejoy Real Estate. I'm here today with Laila Cook, CEO of Make-A-Wish Oregon, and we're going to talk about adulting, wills, trusts, charitable giving, all those important things that we should all be thinking about.
Hi, I'm Laila Cook. I am the CEO of Make-A-Wish Oregon, also a good friend of Jenny Turner's and a 10-time client.
Is that right?
10 transactions.
That's interesting. I hadn't counted. The very first one you did is actually my favorite. The cottage.
Why?
Because it was cute and little and complicated, and I learned a lot, and it was a good rental for my brother in the end. It just was a good, that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
I also remember you calling me and saying something like, I know you only sell mansions,
yeah,
but I have this little cottage. I'm like, no, I sell everything.
Way back then.
You
definitely did.
Still do.
I know.
So talk to me a little bit today around wills and the importance of having a will and having your affairs in order just in case. I know you have lots of interesting personal experience with that, but talk to me a little bit.
Yeah, so on a personal level, but my child's dad died when she was only 5 years old, and he died without a will, and it has put an entire different spin on my whole life. It has become an accidental area of expertise that I have, partially because I've had to deal with the business of it and still have to continue to deal with the business of it for years to come.
What is that like? How is it different because he didn't have a will versus if he would have had a will?
So in Oregon, there's a thing called a conservatorship, and so we had to petition the state to have where not specific where Amara lives, but to deal with the money, and to deal with, even though we all agreed, his parents, his brother, we all agreed on the fact that what he would have wanted to have happen had he had a will, the state overrides whatever the wishes are. And it kind of creates a different way in terms of business to kind of engage professionals in the conservatorship, as well as a longer, different timeline for inheriting his assets.
And he wasn't a multimillionaire.
Nope.
It's not we're not talking a whole lot of money that way.
No.
But it made the process so much more complex.
And continues to make it. I had 2 meetings today, one with a lawyer and one with a wealth manager to kind of do a inherited IRA distribution. And so the stuff keeps on happening, and because there was no will, all of those professionals need to keep on being paid,
right,
for years. So it's not free. It's not also what we would have wanted, what he would have wanted, and we're all in agreement on what he would have wanted. So it is kind of the tax implication is different, but also just on a very basic level, the kind of professionals who have to do wraparound services are legally required.
And is that because the state's worried about protecting the minor?
Yeah, of course. And of course I always say laws exist for a reason. Of course, somebody at some point, or lots of people probably. Took the money or spent it nefariously or were bad actors in the system. But even if you're not a bad actor, you get treated like a bad actor.
Right.
And then I had to get insured bonded for the amount of money in conservatorship, and it's just all this wild stuff, and it's a whole bunch of stuff that nobody knows even the words to use. It's go into school when you're already grieving, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, because it's not there was a whole lot of emotion going on at that point as well, then having to deal with selling his house and paying bills and figuring things out. What, on a day-to-day basis for you managing, because obviously you're managing money for Amara, how does that, you have other people giving you advice, do you have to follow it?
Yep, so the judge gets ultimate say, and for instance, if we wanted to, the advice is very strongly to put it in a 529 because it saves money for college,
Yep.
It has less taxes involved. It is what he would have wanted to pay for her college.
Right.
That's theoretically what we tell her the money's for. We can't do it. The judge says it can't be that restrictive because he didn't put those restrictions on it, and we all agreed that's what it is for, right? So yeah.
So you don't get the tax benefits.
Nope.
Because the judge said, sorry, you can't put it in a 529.
Correct.
Interesting.
And I will say, I have met so many people, both personally as well as through my work, who just don't want to deal with their will, who don't want to have the hard conversation about what happens to my kid, what happens to my money, what happens to my account, and gosh, I had this IRA from 401k from way back that I don't even know where it is.
Right.
So it's like this real dumb stuff to deal with, but the cost of not dealing with it is real high.
That's what, I mean, in our office a couple days ago, that's what started this, is we were talking, and 2 of my employees have young kids.
Yeah.
And neither one have a will, neither one have a plan. Life insurance kind of goes along that same thing, right? Like, what happens if you die? And I'm a big believer in insurance. So, like, I am very well insured. I am worth way more dead than I am alive. Like, I have a lot of insurance on me because if something happens, I want my child to continue to be able to be raised like he's being raised now, right? Like, I want to have that stuff in place that we could pay for college and we could do all those things that he needs. But I think it's the same thing. Like, people don't think about life insurance. They don't think about that stuff either.
I mean, the truth is most people think of themselves as in more debt than they're worth, right? So, and many people are in more debt than they're worth,
Yep.
Sure. But if you die, you don't think of like, okay, student loans don't get carried through. Student loans get forgiven.
Yep.
So there's a big debt difference.
Yep.
And then you say like, okay, now what are your assets? And you know, Chuck's house wasn't a mansion, but it was not worth nothing.
Right, and he had some equity in it.
He had some equity
Yep.
and had some time built up. And so even just the estate sale and all the stuff inside, and
Right.
even the different pieces of the insurance for the car from the car accident, it all has to go somewhere. Right. And gosh, then it ends up being quite a bit of money, and if you can't spend it or do anything with it for 15 years,
The compound effect of that money, right?
it grows.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what happens in your case when she turns 18?
It's complicated.
She gets it though, right?
She gets it. She gets it all. And he would have not wanted that, and we may or may not, quite frankly, tell her that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a little bit of I have had to now parent around wealth.
Right.
And I didn't grow up with wealth. I grew up, not wealthy. And so, like, gosh, what 18-year-old is ready to inherit a bunch of money, right?
Let me tell you, mine's 15. We are not 3 years away from that. Like, we are way more than 3 years away from that.
Yep. So even just saying, like, gosh, can you buy whatever you want or get a fancy car and, please don't wreck it, which is absolutely something that Chuck wouldn't have wanted.
Right.
I know that deeply.
Yeah. When Charles's dad died in June, Ryan got $1,000.
Okay.
And it was interesting because I don't think they really thought it through very well, or at least in my opinion, like, the estate didn't leave Ryan money. They each individually left Ryan money.
Huh.
So when Lee died, Ryan gets $1,000. And really, we didn't have any conversations around what his intention was with that money. Like, they didn't talk about anything, so I don't really know what his intention was. Yeah. We decided with Charles's mom that a good intention would be buying a car. Because he turned 16 in January, he needs to have a car. He hadn't really been saving for a car. But now it's like, okay, this is your budget. And so we're having lots of conversations around, sorry, that car cost $35,000. You don't have $35,000. You could have had $35,000 if you've been saving money, but you have $25,000.
Yep.
And how do you budget around that? And wrecking, it's another good, like, I hope we get a car that then he doesn't wreck.
Yep.
But he has to have those decisions around, how can I spend the money? How can you spend it the wisest?
Yep.
We talk about, like, do you want to buy a newer car with less bells and whistles or an older car that has more bells and whistles? Like, what's that balance and what does that look like? But it's hard. These kids don't understand at that big a scale.
Well, and let's back it up to the reason I came to you originally. Cool story. My grandfather died and Chuck's grandfather died. Each grandfather left each of us $20,000. Mine was restricted to be used to either start a business or buy a house. His was not, and he bought rims for his car and a new fancy computer and a cool computer chair and Chuck and all the things he bought. So I started this nest egg and then have leveraged that house into a bigger house, into another bigger house, and now have, what I feel like is kind of my dream home in a neighborhood where I would never have been able to afford because I work at a nonprofit and I don't I get paid partially in magic. But
Totally.
That's part of the thing to say, like, if you're intentional, not that there's a right or wrong answer to a car or rims or a house, but you get to say if you do it while you're alive. You do not get to say if you don't say, right? And so, one, you can formally get a will, you can formally have insurance, and you can kind of divide your assets in a smart way, or you can just like, meh, and then you lose a lot of control and a lot of opportunities to leave a legacy and to leave a lesson and to say, like, what would be important to me is teaching you the pathway to gaining wealth and to gaining adulting skills. Totally. And or you can buy rims for your car and have, which absolutely got involved in a car accident. And, like, we're gone by the time, we even got married. So
right. That's how Charles got started, too.
Yeah.
His grandmother died.
Yeah.
And he bought a house when he was in college because of that. The problem now, though, is $25,000 doesn't go very far.
100%. But, whatever that number is,
absolutely.
And that's the point, is like having whatever the number is and then having some intentionality behind where it goes. And even like on a very real practical level, leaving someone an IRA has very different tax implications than leaving them cash. And so having people who know this stuff help you and kind of determine for wherever you are in your life, because for some people it's just like, where will your kiddo go and who's going to take care of them and what's the money involved in that relationship, right? And for some people, they're like, I live in an apartment, I have a car, and I don't know, I don't have but somebody is going to leave it to. Wherever you are, though, make a plan. Start somewhere. And I always say, like, do something and then grow from that. Check in every 5 years, check in every major life event. If you get married, change it. If you have a baby, update it. Yeah. If you, win the lottery, change it again. If you inherit wealth from a grandparent who died, let's
update it.
Update it.
We updated ours when we went to China.
Oh, smart.
Because I felt like it was a big trip. It was traveling.
Yep.
So before that big event, we updated it.
Smart.
But like when we did our will, we didn't have Ryan yet.
Yep.
And our attorney said, hey, if you had a child and you died.
A theoretical child.
Theoretical child that we don't have, who would get that child if you died?
Yep.
And for us at that point, it was easy. It's my mom. That's who it's been all along. Yep. But that's not always an easy decision for everybody. But I loved that he asked me that because although it was kind of weird in a theoretical sense, it was nice later because we didn't get it back. I mean, like he was probably 5 or 6 before we got it updated again.
Yep.
So it didn't really matter. If you're talking to somebody and they're like, I don't have anything, where do I start? What do you say the first step is?
For people who have like a very simple estate and no assets that are complex, I always say there's a great website called freewill.com.
Okay.
Free will. So A, you get a free will. Yeah. It costs $0 to do it. But B, it kind of says like, what is your will? What's your idea? What's your legacy? What is your...
It asks you the questions to get through
the questions, and in a very kind of conversational way. One of the things I love about free will is it forces the conversation about philanthropy. And you can say 0 to, I don't have a favorite charity, I don't want to leave money to anyone, or like, gosh, I want my life to stand for something. I've always been a big proponent of homeless services, and I'm going to leave money to that.
Yeah.
Or in our case, we engage with them at Make-A-Wish to say, like, donors who have been giving to us for a long, long time and want to continue to give and make an impact past their lifetime can leave a gift to make a long-term impact to the charity that meant so much to them while they were alive.
And so that's also a good answer for people who don't have, maybe they don't have kids, they don't know where that money's going to go. Then you can have some input. Like we have friends who have a charitable trust.
Yep.
Right? That's the right word?
Yep.
And so that, like everything is left into that charitable trust.
Yep. So if you're at the point of having a charitable trust, you usually will get a lawyer.
Yeah, that's a bigger deal, right?
You'll have a guy, right? So
that's some money if you're thinking about
different
that level.
Thing. But I think start at the level of a free will or a LegalZoom or whatever makes sense to you. Honestly, it would have made my life a million jillion times easier if Chuck had done that, right? And Amara's life easier, right? But
especially because in that case, all I had to do was say, like, the money goes to Amara and I'd love to have it pay for her college. Like, easy.
It would have taken 10 seconds.
And think about, I mean, although I know it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but like, you guys were really all on the same page.
100%.
About what he wanted. And in a different situation, his family could have been not on the same page as you.
Yes.
And then it would have been exponentially harder, right?
Yes. And it's already such a taxing, trying, crazy time. But because of our grandfather story, we had deep conversations around like the values of money and the values of giving and the values of what do you want your legacy to be and what would you want in that case.
Yeah.
If you could impact your kid, what would that look like? And not everyone has even that conversation, and I remember so clearly the day after he died, his mom calling me, and we had been divorced at the time, as you know, and saying like, well, did he want to be buried or cremated? And, was a big conversation to have with someone who, we had been divorced for 3 years and we hadn't been close, for that time.
But she didn't know the answer.
And I did.
Yeah.
Right? So I also just say to people, like, have the conversation, open the dialogue, and, both with your parents, but also with your spouse or your best friends or, like, whoever's going to step up at that time, because, gosh, we are really uncomfortable in this society about talking about death, and it is the only sure thing.
Well, and money. Like, now you're combining death and money, right?
Yeah.
Like, nobody was talking about either one of those.
Right.
I was given some good advice at some point that if you do have some money, leaving the money to someone different than you leave your children to. So you have like a financial person in charge of that, and then somebody else taking care of the kids. I don't know. I know that's very personal for people, but I thought that was an interesting thing. And so in our world, we did that. Like, my mom gets the kid, but somebody else is the executor.
Yeah. Well, and there's the kind of the dealing with the estate, but then there's also the long-term doling out the money piece.
Right.
And saying, like, gosh, worst case scenario, your kiddo is like drug addicted and whatever. Turn off the spigot of money, or do like a allowance of a specific amount of money, and you can just have all these things set up, and it doesn't even have to be a specific person. And again, the more money you have and the more complex the thing, then the more that stuff is needed. But I will say there was 6 months in there where it was almost impossible to function financially. And quite frankly, death is expensive.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going out and not a lot coming in. And during that time, thankfully, one of our good friends set up a GoFundMe for us. But it would have been really hard to do. It would have taken years to dig out of that had we not had the gift of that GoFundMe, truly.
Well, because the money gets tied up in things. And then how do you pay for the funeral? How do you pay for the cremation? And how do you pay for all the house payment still needs to come out, and all those things still happen.
And then, like, in our case, like, oops, there's no more child support coming in. There's no more, the school bill is still there, and the dentist is still happening, and the stuff that used to be going to this amount of money doesn't do that anymore. So, like, even just the rebalancing of who's paying for what, it changed everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and like, even custody-wise, right? Like,
100%.
Like, changed your expenses because now all of a sudden you weren't sharing custody.
Yep.
You just had custody.
Yeah, and getting childcare around the clock, and or like doing the nights that used to not be my nights, and or doing, like, I have a full-time job, and so trying to figure out what does that look like for aftercare, and that just, it changes, everything changes.
Right. So having a plan, at least then you have a plan, right?
100%.
So let's talk about giving.
Yep.
What does that look like if, like, you believe in your will that you want to leave money to Make-A-Wish? Or what do people do? What do you see on that? Like, starting from the people who maybe don't have a lot of money.
Sure.
And then up to, like, okay, I have a charitable trust. Like, what is that delta?
So it's a really fascinating, I love having this conversation with people, whether it's about Make-A-Wish or just where are their priorities, because I think that where you give is where your heart is. It's a biblical truth, let's just say. Yep. But also, it's such a thing that is tied into people's values and heart, and what is the legacy that you're going to leave on the planet. So I think, though, that Jeff Bezos just had the best article in the planet, thank God, which was like, giving money away well is really hard.
Interesting.
And he went from, like, he gave $100 million to Dolly Parton because she's really good at giving out money.
Isn't that fascinating? To her to give out money.
Isn't that fascinating?
That is fascinating.
So, like, Bill Gates has a building filled with people who are giving out his money well, right? Gates Foundation is one of the most famous foundations in America. So people will go from, like, here's a $100 one-time gift to here's $100 million, please give it out well. It's complex to give out money well. Mm-hmm. And then if you, while you're alive, get to say, are the people doing the work that I want them to be doing? Is it impacting the group that I want it to be impacting? Is it following the geographic outreach that I want it to be? So in a really weird, local, crazy example for us, if people just put Make-A-Wish, the money goes to Make-A-Wish America. If they put Make-A-Wish Oregon, it goes to Make-A-Wish Oregon. And so that's a kind of nuancy thing that, like, gosh, have a phone call, and you would not believe how many times somebody will leave us, like, $250,000 in their estate who have never given a dollar in their lives, have never met any of us, have never been a part of a wish, have never been, and many times they'll just go to their financial advisor and say like, I don't know, what's a good children's charity? And that person will say Make-A-Wish. And I'm like, let's get a little bit more sophisticated and thoughtful about the legacy that you want to leave on the planet. I love getting the gifts, obviously, and we put them to good use immediately. But a really great way I start this conversation with a lot of people is, what do you want to do with your frequent flyer miles? So they're not transferable upon death, but you can give them to us. So it's a good way to start kind of the conversation around what impact will you want to leave on the planet, right? And so whether that is for somebody an environmental cause or an animal cause or children's charity or the school you went to, or in a very complex situation you want to start an endowment that funds forever off the, the principal never gets touched, but you invest it and the income goes to fund whatever it is for years. Colleges are excellent at that, and they can kind of fund a scholarship forever. Or what if there's a dorm with your name on it at your college where you went? That's like on the huge scale.
Right.
But I just think it's such a cool conversation to have with people. Like, what's important to you? What kind of impact do you want to leave on the planet? And then also, how do you involve your kids in that conversation and or your grandkids? And so the other craziest thing we have is the relationship sometimes with kids or grandkids where they're like, I had no idea my parents were giving like this. And people just don't necessarily talk about giving and impact that has on a long-term basis. And it's such a cool opportunity to connect on a real way to say, where do you think we should give? Or, giving kids a pocket of money to give out each year. You've been teaching Ryan about philanthropy since a very young age, but that's pretty unique, honestly.
Well, and it's interesting because my grandparents had a lot of money. My parents did not have money. My grandparents never gave. Now, I should go back and ask my mom again now. But I am pretty sure the answer is they never donated to any charity ever, ever, ever. But for us, that was just natural. And probably natural because, you made it natural, or, people in our world, right? But, that philanthropy part is really important. And it's not, sometimes it's just write a check. Sometimes it's, how do we actually be involved? How do we actually volunteer? I love December because there's things I could actually go do in real life and I get so excited, and we couldn't do it in COVID, and now I'm like, okay, those things are back. But teaching Ryan that's been really important. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago when he won that coloring contest. And we made him give you can save some, you can give some, and you can spend some. But it was made so much better because when he chose to give it to Make-A-Wish all on his own, we didn't have any input on that at all. But then you guys did a great job because you gave him a big check, and but that's important, right? Because he was 6 or 7, and so it's a good that just reiterates that that's what we do. We don't just spend our money. We don't just I work with my team a lot on you can make a lot of money, but then you have to be smart with your money, or the making it didn't matter. You're not making any impact. Right.
Well, and honestly, the most fascinating thing is kind of the generational differences around giving. Like you were saying with your grandparents and your parents, that's very true generationally. So in the civics generation, they just gave. It was part of the expectation of the universe. And now again, with the younger kids, they grew up having to volunteer as part of school, right?
That's
so that wasn't the thing when we were growing up by any stretch, and it surely wasn't when your mom was growing up. So there's 2 generations in there that really don't have a formal education around philanthropy and or volunteerism as a part of...
Ryan has requirements for school.
Has to do it, right? So he will have a much more sophisticated understanding of the nonprofit sector and the social benefit group of what do I want to do with my time and my money that your grandparents just didn't get.
Well, and he gets to see Charles and I choose to spend our time in those ways too, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes those are big things because you can do big things in the world, like Make-A-Wish or whatever, right? But you can also do little things. Help out somebody who just helping out a little bit moves the needle on their life.
Absolutely.
And so it's being in that position where I can give you that and it doesn't ruin my world. But it completely changes your world.
I just had a conversation with someone recently because I know there's been a lot of conversation around Portland and how it's not as clean as it once was, and there are some struggles with the city. And I just said to somebody, they were complaining, and I said, well, what are you doing about it? Are you setting up a neighborhood cleanup with Solve? Are you getting your kids to help pick up trash every time you go somewhere? Are you doing something to make it better, or are you just sitting around and complaining about it? Because it's not necessarily government's job to fix it. It's not necessarily the nonprofit sector's either, but it takes all of us.
Yep.
And it takes intentionality and it takes modeling. And so to say to Ryan, watching you give a gift to even whether it's an organization or just a person who really could use your help right now, you kind of teach
Absolutely.
a lot by those actions.
They catch the actions, right? Like more than what we say, it's the actions.
That's right.
Thanks so much for having me. Jenny Turner, Lovejoy Real Estate. Follow us on social and listen to us everywhere you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for having me, Jenny, and thanks also for bringing this super important topic to the people who work with you and know you and are a big fan of you.
Thanks.